Coming up on Community Connections, we talk with Chief Financial Officer Matt Stanski. Hello, I'm Shannon Pugh, the Director of Community and School-Based Programming here in AACPS, and I also serve as the Blueprint Implementation Coordinator for the district. As part of our Community Connections series, today we are going to learn more about the funding components of the Blueprint for Maryland's future. And to guide us today, we have AACPS's Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Matt Stanski. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
Good. Glad you're here. So before we jump into the exciting world of education finance, I want to know a little bit more about you. And so what does a Chief Financial Officer do?
Sure. Yeah. So originally from a town outside of Detroit, Michigan, went to Michigan State University for both undergrad and graduate school. Graduate school focused on public administration with a public policy emphasis. But moved out east to Maryland in 2002. I took a job as a budget analyst with Prince George's County government.
Okay.
And held that role for about 5 years, and then transitioned over to Prince George's County Public Schools in 2007. I eventually became Chief Financial Officer there through 2012, then moved on to the School District of Philadelphia, where I was Chief Financial Officer there as well for 3 years, and then moved over here to Anne Arundel County Public Schools, where I served as Director of Financial Operations for about 7 years, interim COO for about 10 months, and now Chief Financial Officer. And so basically, a Chief Financial Officer for a school district just manages the day-to-day finances of the district. You know, we have about $1.6 billion operating budget, another $230+ million capital budget. And so, you know, managing the day-to-day finances of the district to include how people get paid, paying vendors, accounting, purchasing, things of that nature. But so, you know, what you would typically envision as a CFO doing, but also kind of see my role as a strategic partner for the board and the superintendent and the leadership team in ensuring that the strategy that the district has outlined, that there's resources aligned with those strategies to ensure that all students are getting what they need to be successful.
So what's really unique about that I hear is that background in public policy, working for a county government, and those pieces, because when we think about Blueprint, there's just so many different layers that is budget, but is also very much of that policy piece. And so thinking about, there's lots of different components of how Blueprint is going to be funded, but thought we would share with the audience really two pieces. And so we have foundational amounts and we have compensatory education. So I thought we'd start with foundational amounts for funding. Tell us what that is.
Sure, yeah. So foundation funding is really envisioned to be your basic day-to-day operating funding for schools, right? And it is driven strictly on the enrollment in your school district and the enrollment in your school. So Anne Arundel County has roughly 85,000 students. K through 12, AACPS gets funding both from the state government and from the county government for every student, a total of about $8,400 per student split between the state and the county to then fund the day-to-day operations of the school.
And that split between the state and the county, is that even? Is that, what's the percentage breakdown?
So the split is depending on how wealthy you are as a jurisdiction.
Okay.
And Arundel County Public Schools is considered one of the more wealthier jurisdictions in the state of Maryland. So right now our split is about 38% state government, about 62% county government.
All right, so definitely funded much more by the county than by the state.
Correct.
In this formula.
And so a district, let's say like Dorchester County, which is considered not as wealthy, that ratio would be flipped, where the majority of the funding would be coming from state government and less from county government.
So is foundational funding new under Blueprint, or is it the same that we've had before?
No, it is the same as what we had before, with one small caveat. There's additional requirements now that we have to ensure that that foundational money is not only going to the district, but also going to the schools that the students are enrolled in. Okay. And so we'll have additional accountability and reporting requirements with that funding based on the Blueprint law that was passed in 2020.
Okay, all right, interesting. And so one of the other components is this compensatory education. So what is that?
Yeah, so as we've talked about foundation funding, compensatory is an additional funding amount based on the poverty that the district and the individual schools have in their communities, right? And so poverty is always a difficult measure, or a difficult topic to measure. And so there's, different possible metrics using census data, but the metric that is best available for school districts around the country is the number of free students in free and reduced price meals. And so that is the program where students can get free or reduced price lunches. And so the state of Maryland determined that that metric for the time being is the best metric to use to generate this additional compensatory education funding. And right now in Maryland, it's about an additional $7,400 per student.
Okay.
And that again is split between the state government and the county government.
And I know we don't have the exact numbers for this year, but for last year, about how many students qualified in that category?
We had just over 34,000 students.
Okay.
Close to 40% of our population qualify for free and reduced price meals.
So when we're funding the government or funding the school system, it was the foundational amount plus the amounts for our individual students who qualify under that program.
Yep.
Okay. How do we spend that money? So we have foundational amount, compensatory education. Do we spend that money differently?
Yeah, I mean, so really two big key areas where we spend additional compensatory education. One is to reduce class sizes, especially in schools that have higher concentration of students who are qualify for free and reduced price meals. So that is really funding there to, to help lower those class sizes to get more direct support to those students who need it. And then we have a program called Accelerated Achievement for All, or AAA in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. And that compensatory funding is again used to provide additional programming, such as mentoring or after-school activities for students in those schools that have higher concentrations of poverty in their schools.
So for compensatory education, that percentage related to poverty as well. So under Blueprint, there's a new strategy within that we're using those percentages for, and that has to do with community schools. So what are community schools, and how are we leveraging community school funds to support students?
Yeah, so community schools is really a vision where the school is the centerpiece of services for folks in the community, both students and their families. And so the vision of the Blueprint was to get funding into schools to provide those wraparound services, those essentially non-instructional services that to reduce barriers to receiving high quality instruction, right? So if you have a toothache and you can't go see the dentist, you're going to have trouble learning your math lesson for the day. And so what the Blueprint envisioned is getting the school additional funding so that student can go see the dentist, or the dentist come into the school to provide services, so that that barrier is now released, that toothache has gone away, and now that student can focus on learning and going to school. And so the whole point was that we have certain schools in the state of Maryland that have higher concentrations of poverty, that these services are necessary in order to implement the instructional program. And so let's get the schools the additional funding in order to have this type of programming available for schools and communities.
So it's really making the school the center of the community with all types of resources and programs. You gave the example of dental care, but also thinking about additional social workers, additional psychologists, all of those. And I've heard people think that when they hear about the programming that's at community schools, that we don't offer similar programming in other ways at other places. So can you talk about that a little bit? So when we hear about there's a full-time social worker at a community school, that doesn't mean that there aren't social workers working with other students.
Correct, right. The district provides social and emotional support in a variety of ways for all students in all districts, in all schools. However, the concentration of poverty, or the community school funding, really allows those schools to enhance those services for those students because the need is greater in those schools and those communities. So psychologists, social workers, school counselors, after-school programming are offered at all 120 plus schools in our district. But in the community schools where the concentration of poverty is higher, we are able to enhance those services for those families and those students.
Excellent. So I know that the research is about concentrations of poverty. So we certainly have students who have needs throughout the entire district. So it's nice to think about there's something a little bit extra for for those where that's a higher concentration because of the research that shows more struggles
Absolutely.
in those pieces.
Yep.
So going back to the funding, how it's split up, is that the same split between the state and the local for that funding?
So everything in K-12 finance is complicated. So there's two funding components for community schools. One is called the personnel grant.
Okay.
And this grant mandates that each community school have a community school program manager and a full-time nurse. And so that grant is completely funded by state government.
Okay.
And so it's about $250,000, and that $250,000 is, again, there to fund the program manager and the full-time nurse. And then after a couple years of having that personnel grant, the school has to put together a plan, a needs assessment, and then a implementation plan, and they will get additional funding called a per pupil grant, which then allows them to enhance the programming that they're offering in that school. That funding is split for Anne Arundel County and two other counties between state government and county government. And this is, again, because of our wealth. Since we're considered a wealthy county, we're one of, I believe, 3 counties that have to pitch in onto the community school program. Whereas the majority of the state, this is a 100% state-funded program. But again, our county partners have been more than willing to fund this endeavor, and it's aligned with their vision of providing additional services, and so it's been a great partnership, and I think worked out well.
Absolutely. I think we have a lot of support from the county government. The county executive is very interested in what's happening at our community schools, which is great to have that. Just out of curiosity, who are those other counties that have to pitch in as well?
I believe Montgomery County and Talbot County
Okay.
are the other two that
Okay.
have a local component of the community school program.
Okay, awesome. So let's go back to compensatory education numbers. So we've talked about local funding, we've talked about state funding. Is there any implications for federal funding related to compensatory education?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the vast majority of our federal dollars are tied to, again, poverty in Anne Arundel County. And so the biggest program, which is Title I, is all driven, again, by our free and reduced price meal counts. And so if you have a certain percentage of free and reduced price students at your school, you will get federal funding for Title I, which is different than community schools. Community schools, again, focused on those social emotional supports, those wraparound services. Title I is very instructional focused, right? And so that funding from the federal government is there to supplement and enhance the instructional program in those buildings.
Okay. So if I were to think about it, so that's a nice braiding opportunity when we think about community schools that outside the social emotional, the family components, and then Title I really focusing on the classroom.
Absolutely.
And the academic
piece. And just so you know, the vast majority of our Title I schools are also community schools, and so there is a great opportunity there for braiding services with Title I focusing on the instruction and the community school funding focused on those wraparound services.
So when I think about Title I, I'm probably thinking about additional teachers, maybe some additional aides, any other types of things.
Right,
that we
additional professional development for the workforce in that building. But yeah, teachers, aides, supplies, additional technology.
Oh, okay.
Yes, there are certain restrictions, but again, as long as it's again focused on that needs assessment of that school and it is instructionally based, it's an allowable expense.
So we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about Title I and some other aspects of compensatory education.
Awesome.
So
Can't wait.
We'll be back in just a moment.
Outdoor education gives the students a greater experience than they could get in the classroom. They're getting hands-on learning, they're making connections, but they're also getting to explore the world they don't normally see in a way that we can't get into the classroom.
They actually get hands-on, everyday experience with the surrounding area, with what they're learning, which makes it easier to stick with them.
I'm really glad they get to come out here. I think it's just a tremendous effort for them to be a part of the environment.
They're getting their hands dirty, they're having fun, they're more engaged, and they're all smiles.
They get a chance to not just learn and get an education for their head, but also apply it.
They take it home with them, they definitely do.
So it does give them a value and a lot of that character building to make a connection to their own lives.
It's important for my children to know that they have to respect the outdoors and leave it as it is so that they can continue to have the things that they like.
It's pretty important for them to know what they do and how that affects the area around us.
We're really contributing to the bay, and I really feel like sooner or later we're going to make a difference in nature.
Welcome back. We are here today with our Chief Financial Officer, Matt Stanski, and where we left off, we were talking about Title I. So Blueprint is very much state, but does Blueprint at all impact programs like Title I? Does it impact any of our federal funding?
So no, not directly. It doesn't impact. Those are separate formulas, separate funding sources. However, a lot of what we use federal money for does tie to the blueprint in the goals of the blueprint, right? And so I'm thinking of all of our COVID relief money that we've received over the last 4 years, right? Better known in the worlds of education as ESSER 1, 2, and 3. These were grants designed to really address the learning loss that students faced during COVID-19, specifically our higher needs students, which is what the blueprint and traditional federal funding look to address as well, right? And so one of the things we're going to have to grapple with here at AACPS, and quite frankly all over the country, is the expiration of these grants. The last grant ends in September 30th of 2024. So we're really looking at the 2024-2025 school year as the first year we've had in 4 years without these grants. And these grants have been used to fund tutoring programs. All of the summer programming that we have expanded and have been used to over the last 3 years are all funded with these grants. And they're really accomplishing the goals of the blueprint. And so we're going to have to, as a district, really make a determination as to what we want to keep out of that ESSER funding, and is there blueprint from funding available, i.e. compensatory education funding, right, to take over the tutoring program, that homework help that people have been used to, that online virtual homework help that that Dr. Hamlin has been running and that we offer 2 days a week, or the after-school tutoring, or the plethora of summer programs that over 10,000 students have taken advantage of over the last few summers. Can that funding be leveraged to continue some of this programming? It'll require some tough decisions because we're essentially pulling $40 to $50 million out of our budget with this ESSER funding, and so we're going to have to really think strategically and look long term what will be the best use of that money. And again, this goes back to my first answer of what's the role of the CFO, and that is really the role that has evolved from essentially the old school bean counter to now a strategic partner with Dr. Bedell and the leadership team to really think through how do we best use the funding we have and align it to the strategies and outcomes we're looking for.
And you didn't mention a term, but I know we use it a lot internally, and if the viewers kind of hear that term, cliff,
right,
the funding cliff, do you just want to
so
give
again,
a good
this is
definition
when we talk about the funding cliff, this is again our COVID related grants was an infusion of cash that was one time. So think about possibly, you scratch off that lottery ticket and you win $50. You don't want to plan something that is ongoing in your bank account that it's going to cost you $50 a month. You only have the $50 one time because you only won that money once. And so we won a whole lot of money with the COVID grants, but it's now going away. And so what we refer to it as a cliff because you have the money there and now it's taken from you. And so on a graph, it would show you like this and then going down. But what we're trying to do is ease the cliff and then have some additional cash come in to, again, sustain those programs that that we have found that are really beneficial for students.
So you made the connection between a lot of how we used and leveraged the ESSER funding, the federal funding for COVID, the pandemic, really aligns with Blueprint. Let's go back to a little bit of the why of Blueprint. So you've hinted at it a little bit, but remind us of what was the intent of Blueprint. Why is the funding a little complicated? What's that?
So the Blueprint has evolved from a commission that the legislature and the governor had commissioned called the Kerwin, known as the Kerwin Commission, and they produced a report about what was supposed to be just funding for schools in Maryland, and it kind of turned into how do we create a 21st century world-class education system in Maryland. And so that commission studied the highest performing systems throughout the world and in the United States, and really came in with like these 5 pillars that they felt Maryland schools needed to adopt and implement in order to create this world-class system. But what they ultimately found was that students from higher needs schools that are enrolled in higher needs schools were not getting the resources that they needed to be successful. And so what the Blueprint envisions is increasing funding for education for all students, but really then concentrating even more funding to the schools and the students that need it the most, based on if they come from circumstances of poverty, if English is not the first language spoken in their home, or if they have an IEP or they're a special education student. And so the vision of this is to really force districts to direct those resources to the schools where they're needed the most, and then implement certain strategies with that funding, including tutoring, after school programming, summer school programming, things like that. Community, creating again those wraparound services to reduce the barriers of entry for many students and families, and that then, if we focus on that process and those strategies, the outcomes we will see will be increased student achievement for all students.
Okay. So compensatory education, or at least the farms forms, help with compensatory education. It's also part of our federal funding formulas. So when we're filming this, it's at the beginning of the school years, and you might, if you're watching, you might have had that form in your or a link sent to you to fill out that form. Can you tell us a little bit about that form? Is it one form per child, one form per family?
It's one form per family,
okay.
And you go online, you can go to your school and fill it out. But essentially, it's the federal government's way of verifying that you indeed qualify for free or reduced price meals. But again, as we've alluded to, it is also critical to a number of other programs that schools can have in their buildings. And so it is essential that everybody fill it out.
Yeah.
And our team, Jody Rissy and her team at Food and Nutrition Services, do a great job of vetting those, auditing them, and then ultimately sending them off to the state and federal government for approval. But every form we get is an additional $7,400 in state and local funding, plus additional funding for Title I, plus it may help your school become a community school, which then, as you know, opens up a plethora of services for that community. And so it is a critical process at AACPS, and again, we encourage all families to fill out the form.
And to plug that a little bit more, so we talk about it's more than just lunch. So you mentioned what the schools can get from it, but also students who are identified also might have either free or reduced price exam fees for some of the exams you might be taking for college, as far as application fees for college. So it's really beneficial for everyone to at least fill it out to see if they qualify.
Absolutely. There's a lot of reduced internet, home internet programs with as well. And so, again, plethora of resources available for those families.
So you mentioned earlier about your role as the CFO is really to be that strategic partner for not only our leadership with Dr. Patel and our leadership team, but also a strategic partner for what we want as a county, for citizens of the county, for our county government, of how do we strategize and leverage funds in a way that really brings about our, the desired outcomes of whatever they happen to be. So we are getting ready for the what you call budget season. And so for our viewers, what would you like the average person at home to know about the budget process and what to think about as they start seeing what the school system or other entities are asking for with budget?
Yeah, I think first of all, lay a set of facts down, which is Anne Arundel County last school year was 15th out of 24th in the amount of per student revenue we get from state and county governments, right? So we are one of the lower funded school systems in the state, which means with the money we do get, we have to make sure it's spent well. And so the budget process we have lined out ensures two things. One, that existing money that we're spending, we do a review of every account, every dollar, to ensure that it's still a good use of money. And so that the taxpayer and elected officials can be assured that when we are asking for additional money, that exhaustive review of existing resources has been done by staff and, quite frankly, by our Board of Education as well. They, we submit a budget to them in December, and then they take 2 months and really go with a fine-tooth comb line by line to ensure that the spending is aligned to our goals and objectives. And so that when we do ask the county government for additional money, we have done that exhaustive search. And and again, it's all with the goal in mind of ensuring that students are getting what they need, right? A budget document is the ultimate communicator of an organization's priorities, in my view, right? Don't tell me what your priorities are, show me your budget, and I'll tell you where your priorities are, right? And so I think that's the quote I live on, and my team and I wake up every day doing that work to ensure that every child's getting the resources they need to be successful.
And I know you have a very small but mighty team who works with every part of the school system to, number one, make sure that what we are requesting, have we looked internally to find where we might get that amount from internally and change our own priorities, for like you just said, or that we're really in a very strong place to be able to justify any requests that we have moving forward.
Absolutely.
All right. So that was a whole lot to take in about the different funding sources. We, of course, could talk about a lot of other things, but we will save that for another time. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. There's a lot to take in, a lot to unpack, but hopefully we learned a little bit more about funding for Blueprint in our school system.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Shannon. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. So that's it for this episode. Join us again as we make more community connections here in AACPS. Thank you.